Time no see, buddy.
Okay, we're gonna
What's
call
going on?
Gonna call this meeting
How's
to
the house
order
coming?
Good. Counter depth fridge.
at 4 o'clock. We're on time.
Think that might help?
Snickers.
Trying to
Snickers.
sweeten her up?
Okay,
Who's taking minutes?
I don't think you've got enough candy.
it's on film.
Yeah.
And we have 4 members of the committee here. That's the superintendent, and our town administrator, and the erstwhile and always welcome John Foster. All right. Actually, I'm going to turn this over right away to Derek and John. They have a proposal that they're suggesting to us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I think John passed that out to everyone, so really we're trying to figure out, we were going through. There's an item of importance on town meeting floor, $10 million potentially for the lining of that project, and really we're trying to figure out the best way to get this accomplished for everyone, if you will. And that's sort of how we came up with some funding sources and such to recommend to the sewer commissioners and see if we can do this to really make it work. The total estimated project cost is $10 million. Right, guy?
Yes, that's the highest quote we got, was 9.2 million, so $10 million would be the,
So it isn't, some people got confused, we haven't gotten true bids yet, we got estimates on it.
correct.
Okay, so we're going with worst case scenario, and that's one of the things that we need to say on town meeting, I would say, is that this is potentially the worst case scenario. Hopefully it's less, but you can't live on hope, so that's why you need the full appropriation, if you will. We're recommending 3 sources of funding. One is borrowing, and you can do it from the regular bonds or the former SRF funding. Was it the Clean Water?
Yeah, it's called the Clean Water State Revolving Fund.
And so I looked into eligible, guy from the Massachusetts for eligible. They list pipe relining as an eligible, one of the eligible activities. This, if you went out just going out for bond, you're probably looking at a 4% interest rate. The clean water is closer to 2%. So, yeah, yeah. So, hope that would be something.
And that's the best we can look for, is 4%?
If we don't get into the state one, the revolving,
That's the estimates right now from our financial advisor, Hilltop Securities. They're the ones that handle our loans for us. But that's what they're coming out to, about 4%. It's a 20-year bond.
So there's two other potential funding sources to reduce the overall borrowing. One is retained earnings. That was certified back in October. And part of this would be also a recommendation for you to have some retained earnings set aside in the future to always have sort of that safety net, if you will. So the July 1st, 2017 balance was $5,348,707. If $2.5 million is appropriated from this account, the remaining balance should be $2,848,707. And this is, that amount is over 50% of the annual ratepayer revenue. It's tough to figure out what your reserves would be, because usually the DOR would say 5% of your operating budget, but 5% of your operating budget is relatively small, $400,000. And given the type of catastrophic nature that can happen with sewer lines and stuff, I would recommend about 50% of your ratepayer revenue. And ratepayer revenue, guys, is what, about 8.8 million or something like that?
The ratepayer specific to ratepayer is about 6 million.
Yeah, about 6 million. So that would leave you in the remaining balance should be about 2.8 million. So right around that wheelhouse. Now the other thing, if you remember from going back to 2014, the DOR report, there's a separate thing called the capital fund appropriation. And you see, there's currently 5.699 million and change, so 5.7 million in there, of which 3 million approximately needs to always be held back, because that's the difference between the betterment payments due and what you're going to get paid back on the betterments, because some people have prepaid them and things like that. So every year, so for example, I think you have about $1.4 million that you'd be paying out from betterment debt this year, right, between principal and interest. And the commitments say you'd be getting close to 1.2 or something like that, I think was the amount. That's why when you see in the budget, you take that revenue from betterment reserves, because all the betterment money flows into that account, and then you're taking the full amount out to pay for the expense. So you never want to go below that 3 million, except, you'll start accounting for that in the future, John, because that should reduce.
Yeah, as you go on in time, there'll be
Right.
less to pay back.
Right. So if every year you were short $200,000, let's say, that's why that 3 million would reduce, because you're pulling that out. So there is $5.7 million roughly in there. That includes the 1.4 million that's been paid out, but that does not include any revenue booked for this year for the betterment, which should be roughly 1.2 million, as we said. So, we can't say that there's 6.9 million in there, because that revenue hasn't been booked into the account. That's roughly what you should be getting. So if you use 2.5 million in that account, and we don't consider the revenue coming in, that still leaves you with the $3 million. Now you can do it this way, and if you go to the second sheet, that shows you what the 4% borrowing would be. Because you'll have to pay principal and interest, and it's going to be fixed principal reduction during the whole.
Yeah, this is the cheapest way of doing it. You could have equal payments each year, but we'd end up paying more in interest. So this is how we do most of our loans, where it's fixed principal across the 20 years.
So you look, instead of a payment of, if you went for the full borrowing, your payment would be roughly $900,000 annually.
A year.
Right. So you borrow it, you're talking about 450, and then as your interest reduces, because the principal is lower, your payment will be a little less every year thereafter.
Yeah, basically, if you go with the 10 million, you borrow for the 10 million, just double all of these numbers.
So if I take a look at the capital fund balance, let's just say 5.7 million, half the whole 3 million, we have 2.7 to work with. And we're looking at 2.5 to be appropriated for this particular project.
Right.
That would give you about 200,000
Well,
in
it
your
doesn't
capital
take,
fund.
doesn't take into consideration your revenue from this year, which would get added back in. We've collected third quarter bills, yet another 700,000 that has come in. And we haven't collected fourth quarter bills, all the fourth quarter yet, so that's additional
In the
revenue.
capital fund.
That's right now to appropriate, because that was the last number, that was last July 1st.
So we would have enough money to take care of the request for the 3 generators.
No, it's bad, say, the capital fund is
Is different.
something different.
Okay, never mind, then I take
You're
it back.
talking from your budget.
Okay,
In your budget.
the capital budget,
Right, the
Okay.
roughly 950,000, which is within your budget, there's 100.
which is different than this.
Correct, yeah,
Thank
there's
you.
145,400 for the generators. So you have got enough money in there, which leaves 800,000 for other capital items.
Okay, thank you.
Comments? Questions?
So, if we're paying roughly 900,000 back a year, that breaks down to about $150 per user.
So how many EDUs do you have, Guy?
6,000.
9,000, we have 9,000.
That's EDUs.
Yes, that's what I was asking, EDUs, that's revenue. So it's
You
Yeah,
have to
but
break it
9,000
down by, yeah.
EDUs. So if you took,
It's the only way
yeah,
we can-
9,301 or something ridiculous, yes. So, because it's point something something, but 9,300 is a round number.
$96
Per EDU.
for EDU.
Okay.
Now, you can take money,
That's $96 a year.
Correct.
correct, yes.
So we're talking $8 a month is all we're gonna be asking from the ratepayers.
You can,
$8
Each EDU.
$8 an EDU,
EDU. So some ratepayers pay more
Yeah.
EDUs.
but the ones that have multiple EDUs,
Okay,
pay
but
more.
still, it's only $8.
that's like I said, yeah.
Okay.
Now, the capital planning, they only approved the generators right now because there's more information requested, which is fine, we can come back in the fall for that. However, that leaves, you have a capital line of $950,000. The generators make sense, you know, that leaves you 800,000. If you're borrowing on the 5 million, you can reduce that and pay your $450,000 obligation without touching the rates. Because I think you should really hit and try and knock a lot of this stuff down with still having a reserve before you start raising rates for folks.
Well, that's nice, but this is only one of the projects that we desperately need done.
Correct. So the next one, because otherwise, if you're telling folks, all right, we're gonna borrow for this, we're gonna increase. That's fine, makes sense. We're gonna increase again, fine, makes sense. We're gonna increase again. But there is money in the pot to help defray that. And that's what you do, you defray the first one, because you can do it. But now on every single one, you're explaining. So every $10 million is costing you $90 or something like that. Yeah, I just can't see adjusting the rates if we have something that can help offset it right now. You will have to adjust it for the future projects if you're borrowing. You can't absorb all that. But absorbing it, but if you can do that in the first round, it's something that should be done. Because you'll still have money set aside, you'll still have retained earnings, you have to be able to use for emergencies and such.
The numbers say we're certainly solvent. I wouldn't be worried about it.
I'm not,
If
No,
we-
well, I like what you're saying. I'd almost like to see it go up just a tad each year, so that we can keep lining these pipes. I mean, rather than come back and look for a big hit again. If we could take small increments and go up every year.
May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To eliminate, I think you had said that only generators approved, and that the other things would not be approved, and then to use that money to pay it down. My concern is that $500,000 we put into infrastructure, those are ongoing repairs, not including the book of big repairs. So I would have to eliminate all these repairs,
So
and
let's
that
discuss
scares
what
me.
the other repairs are. So you're talking 450,000, you're already doing the generator, there's 150, there's 450,000 reduced, that still leaves you with 350,000.
So $350,000 to do, so we'll talk about the pump stations. I've got to do an odor control system for every single pump station, and they're all deteriorated, the wet wells. So I got to redo all the wet wells. Coming into the plant, the same thing. So that money is just about going to cover the plants that I have, because they're all corroded. We have a major corrosion issue. And so if I don't start fixing these corrosion issues, Derek, then we're going to make major repairs by replacing structures, and I don't want to go there. So this is all part of the capital improvement plan, the 20-year plan that speaks specifically to these issues. And I want to maintain funding those things and get them done. So that's what scares me.
So what would be helpful for capital planning is that's not what we receive for information.
I agree. And I want to be very blunt, is that, in a nice way, is that I had submitted the entire capital plan. I think the planning board at the time said, the capital plan says that's not good enough. That has been submitted. That document is real, it's alive, it's a real document. And I submitted that as what I would follow to do it. So I figured in the beginning, I was upfront and said, this is your plan. It's a very thick book, but you can break it down. I'm going to follow this book because that's the recommendation to make.
And that's great, Guy, but you have to fall in line with the other departments and follow the same format of submitting the information.
I can, whatever you want.
Guy,
I
to
have
be
no
honest,
problem.
I could not make a relationship between that document on capital planning and your multi-year plan that you had also given to us in the past. I could not make the link.
And there wasn't a link, because when we gave you the plan, it was without the capital improvement plan. And what I said at that time is it's very fluid and it's gonna keep fluctuating to what rises to the
And
surface.
because of that, the only thing we could really handle on is the details. The others were just so nebulous. I didn't feel comfortable going on with the rest of the plan because I couldn't link it to the document.
And I get it. And I don't feel comfortable saying that I'm gonna do this year, when all of a sudden something comes to a higher priority, and the board says, oh, you can't do that, even though it's a higher priority, because you didn't specifically say at the beginning
And
of
that's
the year.
why we adjust it every year, Guy, because it's the same thing. We can, somebody smelled gas over at the other building. We don't have any plans on working on the gas pipes. However, if there's a gas leak, we have to do that now. So we understand, but I can't say, well, I have a 30-year plan, and within it is fixing the gas.
No, I get that, but within that 30-year plan, you have some very specific things that you want to get done. That's why you create the plan, for the sort of long-term stability, and then you, along with that plan, you create a budget for it, and that goes into your budget, raising rates or whatever that may be annually to make sure we can fund it. And that's what I was thinking. And I get what you're saying, and I understand it. However, this, because it was such a live document, and because it was real, it wasn't just something that we thought we'd like to do, it's something, these things that we absolutely had to do. And so I didn't want to lose the opportunity. I don't have a problem spending this money, but if I need it, then I'm in trouble. Then it means that that living document doesn't get tended to. And I don't want to react.
Is that 900 for every year, or 950 for this year?
It's roughly the same. It used to be $1.6 million, and it's coming down, so so I can't, it may be a little less next year, but let's say around 900,000 is what we spend on an annual basis to do the things that we need to be done.
What do
That
you,
we've got in the big document.
what do you close out to? What do you turn back each year?
Last year, we were short revenue, so that would be a bad year to go by. The year before, I think we turned back about $200,000. And I believe I put $100,000 or $200,000 annually into unforeseen, and I usually don't use it. That's just for the craziness that I can't even predict. So I think one year we did use it. We had some manholes that we had to replace. I had no choice, so we used the unforeseen. So we'll turn that money back, or it gets absorbed into the bottom line of the budget. So, what I think all you're saying, and I'm not speaking to rephrase so I understand it, what you're saying is that in this capital outlay, let's just dedicate $350,000 to cover this.
That's basically
That's
what you're
what
saying.
I'm
Yeah. And the 350 would be if you applied to the Clean Water Trust to get the 2%.
No, it's not that it's a, I'm not saying it's a bad plan, I'm not going there, as I decrease this amount, I just get nervous, because there's so much out there. There's so much out there. I mean, just so much out there, that's all.
So one of the things you can do is with, depending on what your turnbacks are, with keeping your stabilization fund, it's not really stabilization, your retained earnings for, at the 2.88 level, what we do with the town is when we keep our funding at a certain level, and everything thereafter, we've been using for capital. And that can be in a capital adjustment, so but that'd be every October you bring forward. So if there's a difference on that. You know, because there's things we've seen turned back, there's, you know, I know revenue was a little shorter last year, but there were still turnbacks, if I remember. I thought it had been.
Payroll's been turned back, because
Yeah.
payroll has not been fully staffed annually, so I always turn back payroll. And, yeah, there's certain things that we do turn back, but other things that are greater. So I think the bottom line is it's not a whole lot of turn back. I thought it averaged $200,000, and that's, which I thought was reasonable. I try not to spend to the penny, but again, it's and these are projections.
Well, it's
things
good
that we
for
gotta
folks
get
to
done.
hear that. If you don't have to spend it, you don't spend it. That seems very contrary to what they think of municipal operations.
No, it just, yeah, it just stays there in the budget, yeah.
So my thought is, honestly, if you can, with these reserves and such, if you can mitigate the expenses, it's more important to get this done today.
I agree.
I think I've seen the videos and such, I think it's very important. However, we're up against a constituency that's getting hit left and right. And they may turn it down just on the base, if we're telling them right now that this is increasing for it, that may be one of the reasons this doesn't get, they come back and say, well, come back to the drawing board, figure out how you can make it work. And if we can make it work right now, make it work, show them that we're trying to, we're putting all the cards on the table, and then say, these are the next costs. Folks, we were able to do it in the last one, we can't do that. You're now going to, your rates will be increased, here's what it would mean. But I mean, if we have a process for doing it and really taking care of it and we don't follow it, I just don't see that being a good signal to send the ratepayers.
I think the practicality of what you're presenting here, I'm not 100% in favor of pulling that much money out. However, based on the general climate that exists at the present time, I think it probably makes sense in the direction we should go. There's still money coming in, and I think that basically kind of, by doing it this way, it gives us a kind of little boot in the tail to get Ty and Bond off there. Took us and get something going, get these rates established and get onto the water-based rate, so we know what the hell we're doing. And try to equalize things out a little better overall before we get too far down the road.
Mr. Chairman, Ty Bond is, I met with Mike last week, he's pretty much wrapping up in a week or so, but he doesn't have any commitment from the water districts, so that's kind of holding back. So what we're doing now is taking the rates that the water use we've had,
Yep.
and we're gonna apply it to EDUs until further
Okay.
notice.
All right.
So we should have that back in a week or so.
Okay,
And in that, he's also including the capital improvement plans working with Mr. Abrahams, and in that budget, they're gonna figure on the capital improvements over the next 20 years and rate increases accordingly. So I'll present that.
okay, but the one thing I don't wanna see in his proposals is what other places are paying, because that has no bearing on
There's
what
not-
applies to us.
Has nothing to do with anything. It's just,
Absolutely.
I mean, I hear people say we're the only ones with EDUs, but I don't know how many more districts, other people have districts where we can't get water, so we gotta compare apples with
Yep.
apples. And so you show me other districts that have no water ability to get water readings, and then we can see what they're doing for rates.
I think the whole water, the actual
Apples for
readings
apples.
is a dead issue. If something happens.
EDU is the way to go, and we need to refine and be more flexible with water use.
You're up
Yeah, well,
against,
that's
you're up
true.
against it, they're not,
We never will have to, we don't dictate.
you're not gonna give up.
So basically what we're saying is we're gonna borrow 5 million, but it's not going to affect the ratepayers at this point.
Right.
Right. The money, the
So
annual payment
when
will
we
come
go
out
to
of
town
that.
meeting, we still have to get approval,
Oh, yeah.
You still have to get approval from town meeting.
even
Because
though we're
you're-
gonna absorb the payment?
Correct, because you have to vote it out of retained earnings. You can't access retained earnings without a town meeting vote. And you're taking out of basically another account which you cannot access without a town meeting vote. It's
So
almost like
it's the
increasing the budget.
transferring that we're going to town meeting for.
And the
not
borrow.
loan.
And the bottom.
And the loan.
Yeah, so if I could read off the motion for you, that's going to be right. It's a little boring, but at least.
But at this point, the ratepayers are gonna feel no effect.
Correct.
Then how can they say no? I mean, if you,
Anyone can say no to anything.
if you show them a picture of that pit in Plymouth when the pipe burst, and they spent $33 million in
Counting.
2 months,
I think in 2 months, within 2 months, they were already up to around $12 million in
Right.
2 months, and then it just kept climbing.
we can't afford to let it break. Not,
And my thing is, there might be some savings once you get this done from the INI and such, but I do not think we can promise anything, because we don't know it until after it's done. And to say something different, it just doesn't sound proper. It sounds like a sales job rather than giving the facts to the folks.
And Derek, this isn't about saving money on water use or whatever. This is about structurally, making that pipe structurally sound to protect the very, very critical marshes and waterways that we fight to protect. So it's a structural investment.
But the one coming up from Onset is just as bad.
Yes, absolutely. And we walked that recently, and those numbers that we originally, 2 million, are starting to climb pretty rapidly. To replace the entire line is $5 million, so I looked at that also, so I've got that quote and all the other quotes in between, so that's rising rapidly too. So that 2 million projection is going to be quite a bit more. And then we have two double it, so we have 2 of them do the same length.
Can you read the motion, please?
I move that the town transfer $2,500,000 from the WPCF capital appropriation account, $2,500,000 from certified retained earnings, and further that $5 million is appropriated for the lining and repair of the 21-inch and 18-inch sewer interceptor from Swift Beach Road to Narrows Pump Station, including planning, design, engineering, and all other costs incidental or related thereto. That to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow $5 million under Chapter 44 of the general laws or any other enabling authority, and that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to take any other action necessary to carry out this project. Any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, unless any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with the Chapter 44, Section 20 of the general laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's a correct one.
Okay, yeah.
Did you change it to Clean Water Trust?
I didn't see Clean Water Trust right. I'll
I
double check.
have them.
Okay.
Do we want to be more specific as to the location on Swiss Beach Road?
I think, see, the reason for this, the bond council are the ones that are going to go out to bond if we're not going through the state revolving, so they're the ones that are saying, hey, yeah, this is what we would accept as a motion, this is what would be
Okay.
approved, so.
They've written 90% of that motion.
I don't think it's long enough. You could make it longer.
It's
more
longer, it's
confusing.
actually, this, yeah, it's, the Clean Water Trust should be.
Does any of this cost we're talking about include the repair that's going to be done on High Street? How will that be funded?
No, that's funding out of the budget. You know that $500,000 we got in the budget, that's where that money's coming from. And
Does that reduce the amount of this project? Because
not at
that's
all.
part of the line.
It is, but we included, we separated it, because really the line is, we said 2.2, it's really 1.7 when you take those little areas out from the pump station. That is not included in this budget.
Okay, so it wasn't considered, even though there was going to be work done on it, it was not,
That's right.
thank you.
And the other thing that you should know too, you're talking about the numbers from this year, 19, this will probably, the first payment will come in 2020. So,
You could potentially.
yeah, if we take out a ban for the first year, bond anticipation note, and all we'll pay is interest and we pay the principal back, and then guys are gonna apply for the Clean Water Trust financing. You're gonna apply for that anyway to see if you can get in there, it's a better interest rate. When that comes due, that first ban will be in 2020, because you're gonna do the work in the fall.
I was wondering about the timing of
Yeah, so
that.
you
It's just we're late,
Yeah, we can't do.
so there is a bridge
Yeah.
to carry it.
Yeah, we can borrow this, once we get the authorization, we can borrow this temporarily, or we can permanently finance from square one. But that's basically up to, when we have larger projects like this, we'll temporarily finance it to get us through a certain phase, a few months into the project, then we might do another ban, we might roll that over. We can carry it out for 2 years if we want, but at some point, you're gonna stop paying that off. You'll either pay it down as you get into the term of the loan with the ban, or you'll permanently finance it and then stop paying principal every year.
So I would guess if you did find out that we didn't qualify for the state,
We'll still
we
borrow.
thought you'd jump right on it.
It's,
Yeah.
because it's not
We'll
about.
be in it already. We'll have a ban outstanding. We'll just roll that into a
Yeah.
permanent note.
I got
Because it really isn't about the qualification, it's about the timing.
you.
Because it's a process. Once you get in the process, it goes, and then you get approved, and then you get, so it's just getting to that list, to get on the list. When we did the clarifiers, we were on that list, we made the list, and then we decided not to use it, so we gotta get back.
Okay, we've got a motion, we've got a presentation on the floor for what the motion would be. Anybody wanna make that motion or accept that motion?
Is that a motion for this board, or that the motion we're taking to the town warrant?
For this board to take to the town warrant. To approve that. Are you making the motion? to accept it?
I'll make a motion that we
Okay.
accept the warrant as presented today.
All right,
Second,
all in favor?
aye,
500. Approved, okay, gentlemen. 400, I'm sorry.
I voted in favor, I'm
We're
sorry.
gonna, we're gonna let him handle
What you
it.
Should've smacked it down.
Jeez.
God, both of you guys put up hands at the same time. All right,
Can we discuss who's gonna do the presentation?
Presentation gonna be done by Beta Engineering. There is a slide presentation, PowerPoint presentation that Beta is going to.
How long?
5 minutes is all they have. Now, it really, I think when we timed it, it's like 8 minutes, but it's 5 minutes of the floor, and then we can request. So I think what'll happen specifically is,
Well, if we make a request for the presentation, then it's not a 5-minute time.
yes it is,
yes it is.
you always get 5.
yes it is.
Anything more than 3 minutes
Already
is,
went
you'll
through.
lose the audience. I really think we need to focus on a couple shots of how bad it is, a shot of where the line is going to be drawn, and then a picture of what happens if it breaks, showing the product flowing in and out with each tidal flow through Wareham River, up and down Little Harbor and out into the Buzzards Bay. I mean, if it breaks, it's gonna be bad, and I think we have to let the public know that it will be bad, and we really need the money to line it, to prevent it.
I agree, and that's in there. And also, there was a slide of cleaning, because some people are asking, why so much to line a pipe? If you get just the material costs, it's not that much. But the preparation and all things that go around it, so a little blip on that is important.
And
to
how
let them
many
know.
years has it been since the land on top of this pipe has been cleared of plant and trees?
Never. It's been forever.
How many years have that pipe been in the ground?
The pipe's been there since 1989, and the easement above it has not been maintained, and so the roots are in that pipe, so and so they need to know all those costs
So
are
we've had
wrapped into
30
it.
years of weeds and trees and grass and everything growing over it, which has to be cleared before we can do anything.
But they're nice weeds and trees and
Nice and
grass.
trees and, yes, not too invasive.
And it took them a while, because they cemented it, but and now they're invading the pipe, all the joints are invaded. So it just gets kind of crazy, but yeah.
Mr.
So those
Chairman,
costs are there.
Yes,
But
sir.
remember, that's not the entire
Wait a
length.
second, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do with the article when it comes up is to just go through sort of the funding sources and everything, just a quick blurb in the beginning, and then turn it over to the engineering so that, there's two aspects for this. So it's, usually I'm introducing a lot of them, explain how we're coming, what the cost is, potentially 10 million. These are the funding sources, this is how we have them, this is where we're going through. I think that's just a quick 1-minute blurb, then turn it over to engineering.
And at that point, make the point that it doesn't affect the ratepayers at this point.
Yes,
And this is the
And then give
max,
it to the engineer to say the catastrophe we could face if we don't do
Well,
this.
at that,
Yeah,
at
'cause
that,
there's-
at
Okay.
that point, then I would request request that the body allow our
correct.
consultant to speak.
So I don't know if they'll even count me as part of the time, so, I don't think it usually happens that way, so I'll speak to it, I'm not, I was gonna say I'm not long-winded, some of you may disagree.
well, no, Mr. Sullivan, this is the
Yeah, I
worst case.
understand.
Until we get some quotes back, we really don't have a firm top number, but this is the worst case
The worst case is
expected.
the day when you go in there, guy, the whole pipe could
Well,
but this is from the estimates that we've received. This is the
These are
worst case
realistic
scenario.
estimates.
What was the highest estimate?
9.2 million,
9.2 million.
Does that include all the bypass work that has to be done?
that is correct.
'Cause
9.2
that's-
million.
Probably over 50% of the cost of it.
I believe it was like 40%, something like that.
Right.
It's a high cost, it's a high cost.
and if we
The
don't,
lining is the cheap part.
if we don't need this 10 million, at what point would we not be drawing in the money?
You would,
I guess gonna say,
I would say.
who gets the money back?
if
Which
you're,
account?
if you got it for
That's
below
defined
5
upon the
million,
committee.
I think you start hitting into the cash, you
I
know,
wouldn't borrow.
yeah.
You would need, so we could reduce the amount of borrowing we would need if we take a look at the final cost comes in under 10.
Right, so your final borrowing could be less than the 5 million.
Okay, so that's where it would,
That's
be
would be my,
adjusted.
that would be my recommendation.
because that cost us money to borrow.
Yep, so.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Aaron? I have a, since I don't have Donna here, could I have a motion from someone else to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before we go, who's taking notes, who's the
The
secretary?
camera.
It's recorded.
Okay. All right. Good, I'm good. Thanks.
This.
Bob's.
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Four zippy zippy, we are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
What time?
4:36.
Oh, we do have a secretary. You're right, yeah, you got
I learned something.
it. The thing I'm asking is, right when she does the minutes, she's gonna ask me who's recording, so she can do it. She's gonna tape it for a week to make sure that it's all accurate, so she's,
Oh, I have notes.
I'll tell her to call you.
They're not looking. You're not looking, yeah.
We're gonna go to the trust for that.
Where do I go?
Yeah, no, when.
I'm gonna go immediately. I'm gonna actually, I met with Jack last week, and Jack, I've asked Jack to try to get me ahead. So I'll meet him again